Well, Justin took Chucky to the track, had all the fun with it, and then just dumped the trailer off the back and left it sitting in the trailer. So, we're going to go hook up truck and trailer, get Chucky out of the trailer, get it in the shop, start working on this torque converter and the suspension. The Chuckster needs a rear main seal.
Did I do that?
That's not really something you do.
I was a little hard on the Chuckster at the track.
I mean, unless you forcibly made the crankshaft vibrate extra or some shit to take it out, I don't think you're directly responsible. It's probably been seeping for a little bit, but
That's why it had fresh oil in it.
maybe they were just topping it off. Well, Chris had another hypothesis. As you see, the bottom of Chucky is very rusty. Hence, me getting ready to PB blast all the suspension parts before we get working on it. So, the reason it had all fresh oils in the diff, and the transmission, and the engine, how underwater was Chucky? I think Chris might have had a good point with why all of our fluids have been changed, but why were the spark plugs not changed? If somebody just did a general 80,000 mile service, you would think spark plugs would have been a part of that. I think Chris has got a solid point. I really hope we find out who had this before. Like, I want to know the story.
We need Chucky's original owner to come forth.
We need it.
And tell us the story.
If you had a red S197, 2011, you bought it fairly when they came out. Like, this one was made, I think, in like March of 10, or maybe not that early.
It was made before Rebecca's car.
And Rebecca's was early.
May or June of 10. Let's see when this one was built.
Yep.
5 of 10.
Wow,
This
okay.
was one of the first.
This was one of the first ones.
5.0s built. I mean, I think Rebecca's car was 6 of 10. So this
guys
is
had that ordered
literally
ready to go.
first off the assembly line. Chucky originally came to the junkyard without a front or rear bumper.
Yeah,
This
the
was
whole front right was
smack.
caved up.
The actual spindle was broken. It had a floppy wheel.
Yep. Yeah.
Had a
And
hard
show
life.
Show us the videos that you took with the GoPro mount on the mirror.
The infamous GoPro mount.
Yeah.
Oh, it's got GoPro mounts already.
Yeah.
Might have a little something to do with what happened to it.
Oh, you guys didn't do that?
No, it came with a GoPro mount.
That's scary. But yeah, I think luckily we're already dropping the trans, obviously, to do a torque converter, so we'll just have to pop a rear main in it while we're
Did
up
you
there.
plan that?
No, honestly, no. It was just like, okay, what do we do next? Converter suspension. And I think it had been seeping a little before, but now we're actually leaving oil on the ground. Camera, follow cue. There we go.
Huh?
Now we're actually dropping oil on the ground. So now we start making people upset at the racetrack. So, Chucky Tech Tip number 4802. When you're working on something that has a little bit of age on it, it really can't ever hurt to spray PB Blast on everything. Now, Chucky, of course, is even a worse boat than just a little bit of age got to it. You can see by all the rust on stuff. The axle housing being rusted, that's no big deal. They usually come unfinished. That's not a problem. But the rust we see everywhere else on this car, like on the panhard bar and stuff, that's a little bit excessive to what we would normally see on cars like this. So, I'm going to spray down every nut and bolt with PB Blast we freaking got on this thing. Just because tomorrow I don't want to learn the hard way how rusted all this crap is. After I finish chewing my Cheez-Its, I'm going to tell you guys how. I'm taking the wheels off Chucky right now. We're going to do all the rear suspension. AutoZone's laid on my rear main seal, so I want to get all the track bars and the panhard bar and the control arms and the upper link and all that crap done while I'm waiting on AutoZone. So, Donnie's Tech Tip number 8602. Take the wheels off first. Donnie's Tech Tip number 18. Don't be like Donnie and forget about the bolt that holds the third link up to the car. So, before you lift your car up and take the wheels off and all that crap like I already did, make sure when you're on the ground to pull the back seat out, hence the back seat being out, remove your seatbelt, and then take this bolt out before you do anything else. Hold, please. I need a bigger impact. Just like magic. when you're planning on having to hammer out a bolt, like on suspension stuff, obviously sometimes there's a little pressure on it. You need to massage it a little to help get it out. Make sure whenever you're persuading a bolt to come out, you don't just hammer right on the end of the bolt. Try to thread the nut on a little bit and then hammer on the nut, because then you're not going to mushroom out the end of that bolt. Because if you do, it's not necessarily going to go on and go back through the holes it initially went through. Oh God, it's getting harder. So when you're taking out any old rusty suspension bolts, or any bolt for that matter, if it starts coming out and then it starts fighting you on the way down, at that point, I like to stop, spray a little PB Blast on it, run it back up and in to get the PB Blast all in the threads of the nut, or the nut that's up in the body, and then try to come back out with it. And that's what this bolt on Chucky's upper control arm is kind of trying to do. So we're going to spray it with some PB Blast, and hopefully it comes out without breaking. This is our fancy lower control arm bracket from UPR. That, when you lower a car, it makes your angles correct. Granted, our car is not lowered yet, but at some point Chucky will get springs. So since we're putting on the aftermarket control arms now, it's probably just best to put in the brackets and leave the control arms in. And then we can make our height adjustments after we have the car lowered and situated later on. We've got these lower control arm brackets bolted on, and Chucky, the way it sits right now, naturally aspirated, it would be just fine to run it just like this. However, at some point, Chucky will be a single-digit car running 9s in the quarter mile, and these brackets can shift a little bit when you're super high horsepower launching really hard with a high stall converter like we're about to put in this thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and weld the brackets to the axle right now. That way I know at no point ever will they shift on me. Donnie's pro tip number 911. If you don't want your friends to know how bad of a welder you are, a grinder's your best friend. Pro tip number 582. Now that you've ground down your welds to make sure your friends don't know how bad of a welder you are, make sure to apply spray paint to inhibit rust and further hide your shitty welds. So I'm tightening up my last bolt for the rear suspension on the rear track bar. After I get this tight, we're going to go up inside the car. We'll tighten down that bolt that's under the rear seat. Then we can move on to doing our torque converter. Alright, so the last step before I take the bell housing bolts out and we remove the whole transmission is you gotta get the torque converter nuts off, which is a very easy step to miss, and a lot of people miss it. You can still pull the trans, as the input shaft will come out, but it's easier to just pull the converter and the transmission all at once. Alright guys, so we got the transmission out of Chucky. We thought we had a rear main seal leaking, but unfortunately we were wrong. As you can see, we got puddling down here in the bell housing, and if you come under the car with me, and there's absolutely nothing under the rear main seal. So, all of our leakage, unfortunately, is from the front pump seal that's behind the torque converter. Shoot, you can see it dripping out right there almost. So, unfortunately, I don't want to put Chucky's transmission back in the car like this. Not to mention, the fluid honestly looks more like motor oil than it does red transmission fluid. Alright, so I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do with Chucky's transmission. Either get this thing rebuilt or find another one to put in it. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe. Check back next time so you can see what the hell I do and how we're going to get Chucky back to the track.